The only announcement is that no class next week. And then we should get back to Lacey Blossom shortly thereafter.
Cool.
Take it away, gentlemen. Everybody should have the Rightmyer key.
So I think what we decided is that we kind of blasted through the Discover Life key, and it's pretty parallel, males and females. Molly's approach is to combine both of those, and she uses more technical terms, and it's a really nice key. I think we'll go through it and maybe not dwell too long on certain things, but kind of point out the differences and maybe explain some terminology would be good. And people should be prepared to ask questions, particularly about terminology and what her thoughts are. So I will share my screen and we'll go to her key, and then we can look up things on the scope if we want to see more. But I think a lot of these we've already seen. And so I think the concentration is to just work through Molly's key. And if we need to, we can go back and look at specimens that people have questions about. How does that sound, Mike?
Yep.
All right.
So, well, there were
she had
three keys in that revision. You know, one to the southern stuff in the Caribbean and then one for all of the Western Hemisphere, more or less, and then one just for the Eastern U.S. And that's okay. That's where we are. I wasn't sure about that.
Yeah, I mean, you can, and you could go to the big one, but it's a nightmare because you're dealing with all kinds of things that you don't need to see, and because you have to make exceptions for every single species, it gets these relatively simple couplets all of a sudden become more and more complicated to accommodate the larger list of species, which is always a problem with large keys, and particularly traditional ones. You have to go, has this, and sometimes, you know, doesn't have this, or you start doing if then kinds of things and makes it harder. So that's where something like Discover Life can be helpful, because you can still answer simple questions. You do have to plow through basically a lot of material, so it is going to take longer. But, you know, that's why, in particular in these complex groups, using more than one key and passing through, and if you're converging on the same species identification, your confidence goes up. And just remember that we all struggle with in between characters and working on, you know, whether this thing is present or not. So these are it's never like an absolute thing. You just become more and more experienced in looking at specimens and understanding and creating your own database of information about what things look like.
And I will say that Mitchell had a key, of course, to Triepelous, but separate keys for males and females, as well as pretty exhaustive descriptions. And so even though that was a long time ago, it's still a valuable secondary reference, I think.
Yep. Yeah, and we see over and over again that the characters that people choose and a pathway through a key is often really different from person to person. You know, we see this like between Mike and what we put together for Discover Life, you know, often using very different character sets, particularly when we start getting down to this species versus that species. And it's really useful to, again, pair these things up. Particularly once, if you're dealing with things you're not used to looking at on a day-to-day. So here's a good example. When I was first using Molly's key, this is the first couplet. So I'm getting echo now. Something. Clare, do we have that couple? Claire's taking care of it. All right. Got it. Oh, wait.
Be good now.
Okay. So I think we're back to good.
Yeah.
So here it's talking about dorsum of mesosoma and metasoma. So basically this would be the wording of the thorax and the abdomen with pale gray to white banding, and the or pale to bright yellow banding. And so, my definition of yellow in my mind, and I think probably a lot of people, is different from the on the ground looking at Triepelous definition, which is distinct, but usually, like, I've never seen anything that's really blatantly bright yellow. So perhaps there's one in there. I don't know. Mike, do you know any that literally have bright yellow banding?
Not that I would call bright yellow. And this is in the workshops I teach, this couplet causes consternation because we all see colors a little differently. And what's pale yellow and pale gray or pale white to you or me is maybe a little different to somebody else. So it can be the extremes are real obvious. It's just sometimes there are things that kind of in the middle that are a little trickier. Right.
So one thing, the way to think of it, I think we talk about this in the Discover Life keys, is that the pale gray to white banding is without color. Okay, there is just no hint of any additional color in there. And then when you get to this pale to bright yellow, you really should just erase the bright and talk about weakly yellow colored-ish. And a lot of times you have, it's also partial. So I want to say that the T1 and T2 can be, I may have it reversed, but often are gray to white. And then the remaining segments start having a yellow, dirty yellow hue to it. So it's that I completely missed the boat when I started out because well, that's not yellow, but it has to be really looked at. And sometimes also your lighting is messing with you. So if you're using, as a lot of people do now, some of these LED lights, and it is a LED light that has a yellowish hue, it can mess you up on this one. But the contrast, so over time, you'll probably get it. But, the difficulty is a lot of times in a particular collection from a particular location for a grad student or starting, you don't get a lot of Triepelous. So it pays to look online, and it pays, and you can look up on Discover Life, and you can look up here, like, oh, which are the yellow ones and which are the ones that are not yellow, and look at pictures of them and see if you can discriminate them. So I think people just need to spend a little bit of time sinking into that one.
Yeah, the color patterns or the pubescence patterns in Triepelous, a lot of them are very distinctive. And so once you see them, they're obviously very different from the others. And some of those are fairly common species. So it just takes a little bit, like Sam said, a little bit of time just to familiarize yourself with all the different pubescent patterns.
So so if we travel down the pale to white species group, you can look here that this happens in a lot of keys, right? You just want to knock out some really sort of atypical different species first. And so here we're knocking out nigrihirtus rather than trying to key out to it amidst some other kind of stepwise groups. And so I've actually never seen this particular species. Have you, Mike?
I've seen it I've never collected it, but I've seen it in collections. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's pretty obvious, the carina on the top of the head.
So again, just to go over the lingo for people. So it says preoccipital carina, so a raised line, strong, so i.e. obvious, on the gena, so the cheek on the side, and then behind the vertex, so the back of the head. So if you look at it from the side, presumably, you're going to see that raised line run along the border of the side of the face or the cheek, and then run up over the top. And would you describe it that way?
Yeah, that's the key. But almost all the species have at least some kind of a carina laterally on the gena. And the distinctive thing about this one is it continues. It's continuous up behind the head, and none of the other ones are. So.
And then so mesoscutum. So really, that's a one of the terminology used for scutum. So that's the top of the thorax between the wings, the big plate there. Up. Sorry, we have an echo. And gone. So the mesoscutum lacking paramedial band of pale CT. So the and with a note. So it doesn't. So the basically, if you have the center line, there's two lines on either side. And this is common in almost all Triepelous of pale bands of white hair, and those are absent there. And then it says anteriorly along that scutum, so near the head and pronotocollar. And there's some white hair, but not much. And I would presume that that's a lot sparser than these prone, thick white hairs that make up these bands on other species. So not a hairy species.
Right, and the other thing about the anterior part of the mesoscutum is the hairs are not oppressed; they're erect. And almost all the other ones, the hairs are dense and oppressed. They don't stick up, and that's another unusual thing about this one.
So that's why it's sitting here, because it's just really, it's in several ways it's different. And so, you know, she, like many people would, just wants to not get that out of the way. So the rest are not like that. They have they don't have a carina behind the back of the head or behind the vertex, it's called. And they might have some on the gena, as Mike mentioned, and most of them are going to have these bands of pale, oppressed hairs that, you know, sort of make our ideal of Triepelous. Okay, so moving to the next group, this gets into another one, which I'm sure your students might also struggle with. So why don't you talk about mesopisternum hairs?
Yeah, this is a... So mesopisternum, we're talking the side, the sides of the thorax, and this is not necessarily an obvious feature, and because they are hairs, they can also be worn away, and so that can be, you need to look very closely, and what you're looking for are very pale, very thin, simple, not plumose in any way, simple setae that stick out up from the side of the thorax. And sometimes lighting is critical in this case. And for a long time, this used to frustrate me because I wasn't sure, you know, when one OD in length, that's OD stands for ocellular diameter. So they're not really long in maybe the traditional sense, but that's what you're looking for. And you really need to look carefully. And sometimes, you know, enough of them are worn away. You may only see, you know, 9 or 10. That's enough.
Yeah, it's very sparse.
Yep.
And it is also at the, I don't know if she mentions this, but they are at the lower side, really not up at the dorsal edge of the mesopisternum. At least in my opinion, I'm looking at where the mesopisternum is about halfway down and below for that character. The upper part often is just seems to be consumed by pits and often some, you know, oppressed hairs. Yeah,
I'd say medium, like you just said, to lower. And and the word sparse should be put in that couplet, I think, because they're not dense by any stretch. They're scattered. And so you might insert that.
Yep. And then they're also at least what recall to mind, we're going to go look at them. These are uncommon species. So I've seen only, or is pectorelli in that one?
Pectorelli, yeah.
Oh, that's the one that is. So if we jump to 4, actually pectorelli, is it in there?
Yeah.
No. Or we don't have, I don't see it here. I think of, oh, you know what? It's in there, but it's in the, remember we split the yellow with the wings. Yeah. Okay.
But that's a good, and that's one though that for my eyes, is barely yellow. And
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll get to that.
Yeah. So in this group of yellow or non-yellow, clearly non-yellow ones, or at least clearly-ish non-yellow ones, this group here are all uncommon species. So I've seen, maybe a couple Donatus. I've never seen rugosus or brittaini, and I don't think obliteratus either.
Well,
so do you have any insights about these?
Yeah, obliteratus. I saw a long series from the Twin Cities recently. Like 30 of them, and otherwise I've not seen very many in the Midwest. And Donatus, it's here. It's uncommon, but I've probably seen a dozen of them in the greater Midwest. But those other two, rugosus and brittaini, I've never seen them. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how much we want to spend on like going into the details here in terms of differentiating these particular species versus going through. But I think this one here, where we talk about integument, because it's different, where because a lot of these are like, oh, well, the Triepelous is a little longer or a little shorter. And that's another one of these tricky for people to determine sometimes, measurements. But here, this species rugosus with the integument is going to be bumpy. They call it tuberculate, so little spikes. Now, Mike, have you seen that species?
I have not.
Yeah. So that's the thing to look for. Also, this is pretty small for Triepelous.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they're a parasite, so they have to be less than their host, and their host is not super abundant in most cases. So a lot of these Triepelous just don't show up very often in any collection. But you want to know what it is. And oops, I've got a phone call coming in. Okay, so yeah, so Donatus sort of comes out at the end of that ring, and then we can go on to I think 3. Let's see, what are we doing here? Oh, this is lacking. See, these now lack. So those had the erect hairs. These next little group, we're still in the non-yellow hair ones. So this next group are ones that do not have erect hairs on the sides of the pleura or mesepisternum. And so we start with this obliteratus, which Mike mentioned there. That's another one that I just don't see. Is it obliteratus because it has 2 submarginals like many, or doesn't
I think
mention?
So. I think so.
Yeah.
But maybe it's one of those that also has, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, maybe often enough. I'm trying to think of the ones I saw from Minnesota.
Yeah, it's not mentioned. It's not mentioning that. So maybe not. Obliteratus is just this name that I always associate with a species that seems to have dropped one of the cross veins in the submarginals, creating 2. Yeah, nomada, and I think there's another one. So here we've talked about this, and you can go to the past sessions on Triepelous, lacking a midline and distinctly larger punctures on the Triepelous. Another pretty subtle thing, but in this document, Molly has some good photos, and the midline can be pretty subtle. So a lot of when we scored things in Discover Life, and Molly had a really nice collection because she was working at the National Museum, I was often fudged, this Triepelous midline thing when they had them to include 2 categories, barely, essentially completely having them, and a vague midline. And if it was really a tricky one, it might be scored for all 3 on there. But in this case, it lacks midlines. and versus the alternative one with a distinct clipial midline. And that's can be a really good character, but when it's vague, sometimes there's this vague line. You're not sure what to do with that. Do you want to talk about any of that?
Yeah, and viewing angle and lighting is important sometimes for that median line, because sometimes I mean, like you said, it's really kind of vague, but it's still there. But depending on how you angle the specimen and direct the light, it can look more or less apparent. So.
Yeah. So lighting wise, a lot of times, you know, some of the best lighting is at an angle, and sometimes even putting, if you have two lights, both lights coming from one side, so that surface sculpturing pops a little bit, because some of the surface sculpturing is pretty subtle. And if you have a very completely diffuse lighting system, that might be good with shiny surfaces and looking at microsculpture, but sometimes it becomes difficult to see topography. Yeah, I don't know. So we've talked about some of these other things, axillary spine exceeding scutellar midpoint and things like that. It's basically saying whether the spine is long or short. And it's another basically measurement thing. And we've gone over it. So unless you have something more to say, we'll just jump down now to 7.
Sure, yeah.
So 7 here. So this is a new species that she hadn't defined. And I don't know if this one has a name yet. Do you know? That's not species 101, which became Eliciae.
Okay.
In a subsequent one. I'm pretty sure.
Then this one must still be unnamed.
Yeah. So I haven't ever keyed anything to that.
I haven't either.
And unless for some reason, because I believe the one that did get a name was called novel species 101 for some reason. But it's anyway. Well, to be clarified, because it should show up because it is an eastern species. So here we're dealing lacking midline and a weak to strong midline, which we often score for being both in Discover Life. And then we have apex of axilla. So those are the two little wings off the side of the scutellum, pointy things that usually don't project out, but in Triepelous, Epeolus, Coelioxys do. And it's talking about them being rounded instead of pointed and not barely reaching the midpoint of the scutum, same as above. And we see that the counterpart is pointed rather than rounded. So what does she mean by pointed versus rounded? You should take a look at a picture, because your rounded could be my pointed and vice versa. So it's a relative thing. So Claire is asking if we can look at it, and I for sure have pointy things, but in this group I don't have any of these. These are all uncommon species. So I don't have, in particular, I don't have an example. Pardon? Right. So this area here of things with apex rounded is only refers to this one species, which I don't think either Mike or I have seen. So we can't give you clarity. So by extension, almost everything else is going to be pointed, and I'm not sure she mentions any other species having that. I don't know what she has in her guide here, but she has figures and pictures for a lot of these that you should be able to see that feature. So she should have a habitus shot of the back, and you should be able to look at the axilla there. Maybe someone could look that up. And
Georgicus from Mitchell and Brittaini from Cockrell have variable numbers of submarginal cells per Rightmyer in this paper.
okay. So it sounds like Triepelous, like so, like Sphecodes and some of these other groups that are a trend, I would say, towards being nest parasites for whatever reason, lose and gain their submarginal cross veins more easily than, say, some of the solid pollen gathering species. I have no idea why that would be, but it seems to be a pattern. All right, so that's this odd species here, and then we go on to some of the other pointy ones with several different features that help separate it from that species that wasn't described in that paper. And again, we just move further into places that I don't have specimens, and Mike might, but just to mention briefly here, when we talk about color, so what you're getting in terms of the integument is you have black, and then you have some sections, and it's variable, that are going to be somewhere between a orangish, a reddish color, and the extent of that can help separate species, but it also within a species can be variable in itself. So a lot of times the separation is more along the lines of has no orange or reddish segments to its body, which can be the tegula, and it can be and often includes a good chunk of the legs, and in a few cases a bit more of the body, or basically all dark brown. Mike, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, the color, particularly with those some common species like Cressii and Helianthi, that the degree and the intensity of the color kind of comes and goes, and it's not always the same. And you don't appreciate it until you've, I guess, seen a series or seen a number of specimens. But what I'll say about michiganensis is I've seen one, and it had been pulled out as an Triepelous because it's so tiny. And it looked, I mean, that's very easy to think that you've got Triepelous, and if you're just sorting by eye, you know, and that's in this case it had been pulled aside as an Triepelous, but it wasn't. So that, you know, 8 to 9 millimeters for a Triepelous is tiny, and so that's an important feature for that one, I think.
Yeah, so I think it's worth mentioning that in a vibe sort of way, Triepelous tends to be smaller, a little more compact, like squished together, I would say. And also in the females, the pseudopygidial area is narrower. It's clearly much wider than it is long on the body. And in Triepelous, while the shape can be variable and also is useful sometimes for separating things out, it tends to be basically as long as wide, I would say. And then the males are trickier to tell. So Mike, you want to add some notions about that?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm pinning fresh specimens of Triepelous and Triepelous, I mean, I just all automatically pull the sting out with the valvia, so you can, because that's the, you know, occasionally, you know, you do see a specimen that, well, you know, is that an Triepelous or is it Triepelous? So and if you see the valvia that parallel the sting are very different in the two genera. They're very spiny and bristly in Triepelous, but not that way in Triepelous. And
yeah.
So sometimes
there's a couple.
Go ahead.
I was going to say there's a couple on both sides, and there's an Triepelous. What's the one begins with L that I often like? Oh, I've got a Triepelous here.
Lectoides.
Yes, it's bigger and it presents as a Triepelous in terms of like thinness and other things, but it's not
common, right? And it's common too, so you often get it. Anyway. Atripes, which is at Culprit 9, that's one we get in the Midwest. I don't know if it gets over.
Okay. Yep. So are there any distinct things here that you really want to point out? These are combinations of common characters often.
Yeah, well, with atripes, the lead is there in couplet 9, the clippy is flattened. It's really flattened. I mean, you know, that stands out. And it's just like, I mean, it's like the bottom of a frying pan. And most other Triepelous that are in the east, while the Clypeus isn't greatly inflated, it's definitely convex, you know, in the lateral view. And with atripes, it's definitely flat. You know, it really stands out.
So this would be similar to Andrina wilkella, kind of thing.
Yep.
Where the rest of Andrina, well, not all the rest, some are also a little bit flattened, have this slight convexity to their Clypeus, but it's not at all like the Eucerines or something.
Right.
So it's always relative. You know, when it says convex in profile, it's just a little bit convex in profile. All right. Anything more in that world there?
Well, the very last statement about the paramedian band. You know, those are those bands that are parallel to each other and to the margins of the scutum. Those can be very, very useful and important, but they also wear. And so I think, you know, sometimes in this case, it says the band's not reaching the anterior margins of the mesoscutum. That's one you need to be a little careful of sometimes, because if maybe you're not sure they're close, but do they really reach it? Are they worn? So those bands, you know, and the nature of them reappear over and over in lots of Triepelous keys. You just have to be, because they are on top of the scutum, that's where occurs. And so you just have to be a little careful of that.
Yep. Also keep in mind that if you have goopy specimens or even a little bit goopy, that these white bands, these oppressed white bands, disappear really quickly because they're so oppressed, they're so prone that if whatever the goo is, which is often the internal proteaceous, protein bearing, whatever, that are almost impossible to clean off, it just turns black. And this is a truism everywhere, which is if you have hair that's gooped down, even if it may be bright white under normal circumstances, it will turn black. And that can be a problem. That's why you want to keep your specimens clean and to clean specimens after collecting, depending on what you were doing, how you were doing it out in the field. It just complicates things, particularly when you don't have that much experience. So, okay, so we'll head out here to 10. This is the last section before we get into yellowish banded things. We'll see similar things. So here, T1, this discal patch. So when we talk about the discal patch, if you look at T1, in most cases, T1 is covered with a large chunk of these oppressed white hairs. And in the very middle of it, so centered where it begins to transition downwards towards the anterior face that's facing the scutum.
Can we throw up a picture?
Throw in a picture? Yeah. I will open up the thing. You'll see a dark area. While I'm doing that, you could explain a little bit about those dark areas, but these patches are really useful. If you want to talk, Mike, while I'll open up Discover Life, because that's the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, the shape, you know, those white oppressed hairs frame a particular shape of hairless area, and that can be really diagnostic. And again, it can be worn a little bit also, and can be discolored by exudate or some other stone. So you got to be a little careful. But if it's a specimen that's in good shape, and like these images, I mean, it's in many cases it can be species diagnostic. It's very, very distinctive. So
yep. And that's and then you also, although it really didn't come into play, at least in the wording that I was looking at just now in Molly's key, the shape of T2, the oppressed hairs here, and what this, in general, there's a band across the bottom, and then there's something going on the side. So here, it's the band is you know, what would that be called? Even acute to the edges, whereas actually we have a key, so you can have vary from nothing basically on the sides in terms of oppressed hairs running up, and people use different language for this. You know, Tom Ornifurco in his Triepelous one has a entirely different lingo for talking about these things. You can get something that's a 90-degree, and you can get things that are 45-degree in, and like we just saw in this one, you can get things that, depending on how you're measuring your angles, are basically 180 degrees out.
Yeah, yeah, and that's
really
concave.
useful.
Yeah, that's concavus. That's a very distinct species.
Yeah, I mean, I always find it irritating that the species that are distinct, that are really distinct, have a million distinct characters. And then everything else is sort of in this muddy middle. It's like, come on, can you share some of those distinct characters?
Sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think absolutely. And these hair patterns too, pretty much. Would you say, Mike, do you see much male-female differentiation in hair pattern, hair color?
Not dramatically so. And I think that's why Molly, put both sexes in the same key. But morphologically, in terms of structure, the males and females are quite different, and
Yeah.
I think different enough so that there are other features that don't wear away or get discolored in both sexes that are really useful. Like concavus, the one with the image here on the left. I mean, the females are totally unique. With the tail end is blunt; it's not tapered. I mean, it's a very distinctive species, and so there's some structural things I think that are just as important, maybe more so than sometimes the hair patterns.
Yeah,
they don't wear away.
Right. So yeah, so in females, a lot of it, the different characters would all be around the suit. Not all, but focus on the pseudopogidial area. So that's the area at the end of the tip of the tail that we're not seeing here because this is the male guide, and that I guess is used for something to do with pressing the egg into the wall of the nest, or I'm not sure, but it's roughened in a unique way. And then in the male, often it's the sternites have different hair patterns.
Yes, yeah. And maybe we'll look at some of those.
We, and we did do that. So when we go back now to the key, now we're flipping to things that have a bit of a yellowish coloration in there. And we see that we're replicating what we talked about before. Has erect simple CT, and this is where we're going to see the pectoralis here, which is relatively common. And that's the one that I see enough to go like, oh, there's those hairs. It's got to be it's probably going to be pectoralis. And, you have, again, weak midline on the Clypeus versus strong midline. Tricky, right? So that's why she has several characters here, because your weak and my weak are different stories. So here it is. These two, because we're going to 12, have the obvious but sparse and have to be looked at closely erect hairs on the bottom side of the pleura or mesepisternum. And then you get to separating brittaini, which I've never seen.
I've never seen it either, not knowingly.
Yeah, versus pectoralis, and based on a set of different characteristics, including in the pseudopogidial area, which I just think probably for today, we're just not going to get into a lot of details, or we'll never get through this. So this has yellowish, and if we go then to the next group, which doesn't have any of the erect hairs on the pleura, you see concavus, and this is a good one to look at if you want to look for yellowish, because it is pretty obvious on it. And so is remigatus. If you want to like, oh, what is this subtle yellow? These are two species, particularly both concavus and remigatus are pretty easy to ID, and both can be common. Remigatus much more so, and you can use them as your exemplar of like, oh, that's what they're talking about. Because usually it shows up, particularly remigatus, because it's a Peponapus pruinosa specialist in most environments, because it's going to be in gardens and in pumpkin fields and things like that.
Yeah, we see in the Midwest, concavus is soup. I mean, it uses Sphaera obliqua as a host, at least one host, and it's common. I mean,
yeah,
it's,
we had, when we started, we didn't have any records for the state, and we've gotten several now by concentrating in these areas that do have Sphaera in it. But it's in the East, it's just not as abundant, I think, as the Midwest. But probably Sphaera is not as abundant because you have prairies with composites all over the place, and you go, that's where people go and look. And we have forest that sometimes has openings, that sometimes has large yellow composites and things like that in it, that often will then show, and Sphaera will show up. But Sphaera unless you have a really big, good garden, it doesn't really show up so much in the suburbs. If it's a really hunky chunk garden, like you are a native plant grower, then you'll see it sometimes. But most of the time, the average suburban garden doesn't have any Sphaera, and therefore concavus possibilities are zero. So we see this in rural natural areas and not that many in the East, this species, which is nice because it is distinct and has, just if you look at it, the back, I'll pull up a picture here, it just has a really nice pattern to the scutum and somewhat similar vein. So does remigatus. And there is a picture, but let's see if I can get this right to here. So instead of these submedial lines and nice crisp, why isn't this opening? This should open all the way up, but it is not yet. Darn it. Should have tried it. That's our picture, but that's a little bit better.
There you go.
You see that this mantle area, will this click even more? I'm not sure. All right, better. So as Mike pointed out, you have this U concave pattern here, which is maybe unique.
It is, I think, in the East anyway. Both sexes,
Okay,
males and females have it.
Yep, and then you have more of a mantle of white oppressed hairs up here, and you don't have any of these chevron or anchor shapes that remigatus has, and you certainly don't have these submedial marks going down. And it's big. It is a
Really
big beak.
Yeah, and also that's a good example of what Molly meant by yellow. I mean.
Oh yeah, sure.
That's yellow.
And here's your oddball
it,
white band at the end.
It gets fainter towards the end of the abdomen. Yep.
See how subtle it is? So there's something that's more probably pretty darn close to what a white gray hair would look at. And now you're seeing this. This is noticeable, right? So this is in probably in our books a clear yellow by definition of what you're calling yellow, but you really don't want to call it yellow because people have expectations they're going to see something like a bus on it. Coloration versus the white other ones. But you could very easily call that, if you weren't into the subtleties, you could call that white. Like, oh, those are white hairs. But if you look, it's dirty, dingy, yellow, white. Yeah. So anyway, welcome to bees. All right, let's go back to Molly's keys here. So concavus, that can be knocked out pretty easily because of that and almost right away. And when you look elsewhere, you have these paramedia bands coming down. But I think remigatus, which should be covered down there, sometimes doesn't conform to really having paramedial bands, but it has, I assume that it will show up down here. It has enough differences. So, yeah, so we get into, what time do we have here? How many more?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. Feel like I should hurry up here at least a little bit. When we talk about distinctus, I don't have anything in particular that I think, to talk about there.
Yeah, it's fairly common in the Midwest. It's a parasite of Dionomia heteropoda.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
yes.
And so it's another big bee, and it's very distinctive pattern. And again, it's another one. Even in the field, you can recognize it.
Yeah, it's really red. It's really, really red. At least where we are in terms of the coloration.
Yeah, they're not here.
Oh, they're not. Oh,
nope. They're yellow, like the one you got on the screen, but even more so, I think.
Oh, weird, because well, maybe variation. I always forget that that's what this is, but it's got tons in. This is the inefficient way, but it's got tons of red on the legs.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I misunderstood you. I thought you were referring to the pubescence.
Oh, no.
No, the Midwestern ones look, they
okay, good. That. Yeah. But you can, as this comes back up, notice again, here are, in fact, these two segments, I would say, are more white. This one's really clearly on the white gray, and there's your yellow bands. And that's a general pattern. It's not all the same, and these posterior bands tend to be, back to a whitish. And you can see up here, it's kind of equivocal, like what am I looking at there in terms of coloration? These, though, are very clearly yellowish. You can see how, even though this bee is working with Dionomia, a really different group than it's not even a userine. And so it probably diverged a million years ago. It still has a lot of these same characters. So yeah, that's a fun. We found that was, again, not known from the state. And then we found this big colony, which is very uncommon. Like there were very few records, and we still have very few sites that have the Dionomia. Some, they just show up here and there. In a complex of sand mines in the region. In fact, not far from my house, I get Dionomia in my backyard, but they have to fly all the way from there.
Yeah, we talked about this.
Yeah. So, but Distinctus showed up there, and Tim and Don, who are also big collectors in the area, they have quite a few, maybe 20, 30 of them. So apparently there are still, the Dionomia is common enough that they can sustain over time this Triepelous, which really doesn't have records. I think it's several states away, probably North Carolina or something. It's just, there's a lot of these weird patterns. Okay, and does it nest with Triangulifera, Dionomia triangulifera, do you think?
Do not know.
That's a lot smaller.
I have never found them associated, but that doesn't mean anything.
Right. Yeah, because that species there too, another big weird disjunct. Sand mines, gotta love them. Don't fill them with trash. So, okay, and so you have this, again, it's mostly patterns of things that we've talked about before. And then Quadrifasciatus, I've got maybe, I think, one record, but you probably get more in the Midwest, right?
Yeah, it's a parasite of Spastra atripes.
Yeah.
And it's a sand, that's the only place we find it's along the Mississippi and Missouri rivers.
Okay.
But it could be common, very, and super distinctive. I mean, it's another really, the pattern is very, so, I mean, I don't know if atripes gets out. I don't think it gets over your way. Maybe it does.
No,
but,
it does. It's only on the coastal plain
okay.
do we get atripes, but and I think, again, I have to go back and look at my records. I think I only have one specimen, a quadrifasciatus, but I may have to, based on what you said, add it to the sand species list.
Oh, I would.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Do you think of Sphaestra atripes though as sand specialist?
I wouldn't call it. Walt LeBurge said as much in his revision, but we find it in other wetlands where there isn't much sand at all. But I think, I mean, it likes sand, definitely. So I wouldn't say it's an obligate, but it certainly is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, do you think its nest parasite though is an obligate sand nest? Like it needs to have atripes in sand?
That I don't know. But that's the only place.
Maybe
the only place we found quadrifasciatus is in sand deposits along those big rivers.
Okay, I'll have to look at where records I have are from. Okay, well,
like the Ohio River, be along the Ohio River probably, and some.
But do you see it on? You only see it on riverine sands. You don't see it on interior sand deposits like Southern Illinois or Great Lakes.
Can't. Yeah, it is up. It's up in the Massachusetts area, in the Great Lakes. Those those lacustrine sands. Yeah, it's not common, but it's up there. Yeah.
All right.
So maybe sand.
Okay. All right. It's more on. There's so much more on these things. Okay, so then so it has this huge pronotal collar and several other things that make it's big, make it different in terms of like these kinds of things separate it from all the others too. So it's a nice, very distinct one in groups that often can be a little confusing. So here we have the pseudopygidial area shapes. So this would be females only. And triangular, and then something that's not triangular. And if we look at what that means, this is the simplex, which I think Molly might consider to be a complex. And I'm not sure she ever got around and rhododontus to describing that further. I believe we found one of these in the state. Weirdly, I'd have to go double check, but Jean, didn't you find one on Poplar Island? So which is a dread spoil site and just way out of range.
Yeah, we got one on Poplar Island, the first state record.
Jeez.
And I think the nearest state record, first of all, it's a super uncommon thing, was maybe like Georgia or something weird.
Wow.
Do you see a simplex shows up pretty regularly, but do you see this?
I've never seen it.
Yeah.
Never seen it.
Yeah. Lots of cool things on that dread spoil site, which in a lot of ways doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Including invasive species that have shown up and crazy. So it just said bees are dispersing because it's 2 miles to the nearest landform.
Wow.
From that island. And that island's not huge. What was it, like 25 acres, Gene? If that.
Don't remember.
Okay. Anyway, it had gone down to about a couple acres scattered among several tiny remnant islands.
Yeah,
Clearly
it was down to 4 acres before the restoration.
Yeah. Okay, so if we go now to here where we're looking at nevadensis.
Somebody's asking, can we look at some pictures of the acute angle of the T2?
On the acute angle of T2. Oh, I see, of the band on T2. Well, what species has that? Well, we can go back to the guide because there were some pictures there on that one. And if we look here at the Triepelous guide and move upwards, so strongly acute, there's a weakly acute, which we don't have a picture of, but so here's the hair. This is T1, T2. Here's that discal patch, in this case, quite wide. On T2, you have the hair band, which I think they all have along the apical rim. And then the important thing is like what's going on the sides that help differentiate. And in this particular case, you have this acute angle. If that's what, is that the question? Am I answering the question that way?
Oh, thanks.
Okay, all right. You can see when we like bring up this one, so we do have a hairband going up, but it's square in terms of to the lower band, and sometimes it's kicked out and it's at greater than 90 degrees. And then you have that concavous one which would be measured as obtuse, right? Greater than 180, but it's also the whole area is concave and you don't really have a very distinct band. The whole area is sort of filled in. Again, another unique aspect of that particular species. All right, this as you go further and further into keys, you get into the kludgier and kludgier species groups that you're going to be like simplex is sometimes one of those ones I have to spend a little time to confirm that that's what I have. Michiganensis, do you see that one?
I've got a few specimens from western Nebraska, I think.
Okay. So, and I don't know. Yeah,
outside of the Midwest. It's supposed to be here. We just haven't found it.
Yeah, but you can see it's a whole series of characters that are none of which are particularly distinct in it's like the combo works to differentiate it, but not anything like some of the other species we just went through. And so, okay, Gene said North Carolina and Pennsylvania. Oh, in Pennsylvania? Okay.
Pennsylvania.
For Rhodonanus. And then also just pointing out, if you don't look for these things and you're not spending a lot of time hunting bees in general or collecting in interesting different habitats, a lot of this stuff might as well be extinct because you're just not going to see it. So what we were talking about at the beginning with Calides ciliatus, same thing. It's been there. It has to have been there, including its super rare nest parasite apparently, but who collects in places you get your feet wet in dense tangles of dodder, and who knows what else. But once you do, probably it's regular. I mean, James was saying, oh, this is 5 miles from my house and it's going to be a housing development next year. So it's not like he was in an exotic location. It's just no one is jumping into wetlands with dodder. Okay, back to Triepelous. So Remigatus, the thing about Remigatus is it's common and you can, we'll just call up the picture. You can pretty much ID it from the anchor shape on the back in combination with a small triangle or diamond shaped discal patch. So let me just type this in. And this has to be the species that shows up the most often in Triepelous land. You see, okay, let's see if we can actually click on this. So yeah, this sort of mitten triangular shape with this small, I don't know if you want to call that triangular or quadrate discal patch. I don't think you need to look any further on that. You don't see, everything's dark. There's no reddish areas. Anything to add on that, Mike?
No. It's not all that common out here. I mean, it's here.
Oh, really?
It's not. It's one of our it's certainly not a real common species.
Yeah. It's probably just reflects the fact that you have more open country with big composites that you guys are looking in than we do. And we have gardens. And this will show up anywhere. You know, it'll show up in the middle of the city because people are planting squash and pumpkins. So Remigatus, pretty straightforward to ID. And if we jump down to the next.
Never seen it. Never seen it. I've never seen Minardi.
Yeah. So Claire asked if there's another parasite on Pepinapis, and I don't think so, right? It's only Remigatus.
As far as I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one was on our list of species that hadn't been seen in 20 years. If you remember that paper from 2010, I think it was. But I did see one show up in the South, in the deep South, a number of years ago on, you know, like southern Georgia, Florida area. It's, if I recall, it was very distinct looking. And I forget, I think it is it another Svastra? Maybe one of the southern Svastra specialists? I'm not remembering at this time. Gene will tell us.
Okay.
So yeah, this ovate pseudopogidial area, if I remember, it was monstrously large.
Wow. Okay.
And yeah, so 15 to 18.
That's a monster.
Yeah. And yep. So well, if we can look, I think we have a picture of it. With a minority.
Just a heads up, we are over time. Hey, we're here together and can go over, Tom, if you just want to wrap up the last 4.
Yeah, we will. So because we're just going to get, so it was, if I recall, when I looked at it, it was like, wow, that is big. That has to be something different. So it even looks big in this picture. So I won't go into any further there. That was a fun find. So these last, so first of all, maybe even more than Remigatus, we see Lunatus everywhere.
Well, I totally agree. And in fact, if you look at Molly's revision, she lists how many specimens of each species she looked at, and almost half of all the specimens she looked at were Lunatus. So that tells you how it's common throughout the whole country. Maybe the most common. Yeah, and it's also variable.
Yeah. No, color can be pretty variable on the extent of the legs. And if I remember right, a lot of the times the keying out comes down to, I think it lacks or does it have a central clipial raised line? And then the T1 was, you know, pretty distinct. It doesn't, in Discover Life, it keys out pretty quickly with just a couple clicks.
Okay, that's good.
And so you don't have to go way down here. I'm guessing it's probably like a Melisodes trinotus B, because that's the most common Melisodes for us.
I think Molly lists bimaculatus. Melisodes bimaculatus is as a probable host.
Yeah, in fact, that's it would be a toss-up as to whether bimaculatus or trinotus is more common in our area. So that would make sense. Question. It's asking how specific the Triepelous are. Mike, you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, I don't think there are any species that are what you'd call generalists, as far as we know. So, you know, some of them are, you know, like the one that's on Pepinapis. That's apparently it's, you know, maybe other Pepinapis somewhere else in its range. But I think most of them seem to be fairly specific. I mean, the Quadrifasciatus is apparently only on Svastra atripes, and etc. So they seem to be fairly particular.
Yeah.
And
Some
there's
of
some
the-
we don't know yet, you know.
Yeah. The tricky thing is the hosts, often the host nests are hard to find. And then you might find a Triepelous poking around. So you would want to collect it, of course, but sometimes it's not necessarily the case that something poking around or even going in and out of the nest is a host. It may be just checking it out or something along those lines. And probably they make mistakes too. So this is one of those things where you just need long-term natural history, or you need someone who's really spending a lot of time with the host and digging out nests. Something more definitive would be, I dug out this nest and raised this Triepelous out of a nest that I knew was this host, and I found host larvae and adults in it too. But that's almost never done. Nomata are really a classic case of fuzziness in terms of hosts. A lot of the hosts are like, well, it was near. I caught a bunch of macra at the same time, so it must be a macra host. Maybe, but yeah. So,
It says Molly does not list host records from Renarde.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so these two Mike mentioned before, this becomes a rough pair, I think, of as often I'm spending a lot of time like, and then going back to my collection. The micropygius is not something I've ever keyed out, but Mike, do you want to?
Nope, I've never seen it. But yeah, Helianthi and Crescenii, boy, that's given me a headache once or twice. But both fairly common in the Midwest, and often in the same place, and same size. I mean, they're very, very, very similar. And neither one of them has anything that's any single feature that at least tells me that that's what it is. It's kind of a combination of things.
I've always thought that at some point in some proverbial future that someone would pay the people who are collecting a lot of these things to all just kind of get together and bring your, let's just do Triepelous and then work through some of these tricky groups or even lazy glossum and things like that. Because a lot of times it's just staring at long strings and looking for consistency versus when you have just one specimen, it's really difficult sometimes to get clarity in a closely sussed pair, which is a lot of times what the graduate student or researcher is confronted with. And that's why I realized after a little bit of being in the business that I wasn't going to train a new set of people who are just going to immediately replace me, or I was just having a few courses isn't going to work. So, but it would be good to have more people like Claire, myself, and Mike and others available and in the game of spending hours staring at things to help out other folks. So, all right, I guess we're way over time now. So we'll, unless there's a quick comment from someone, we'll call it.
And I was going to ask this too. Thanks. Can we pull out some pictures of these two species, particularly maybe?
Yeah, I should have one or the other.
Do you have any?
And I think I want to say that I see Cressonii more. I can't even remember what the differences are. I spent a lot of time struggling over it. Do you know what are we looking for in terms of differences?
Yeah, one. I don't know if this pertains to both sexes, but the pressed hair patch on the sides of the thorax is continuous in one and not in the other. It's right. Yeah, so it's right under the wing, under the pronotal lobe.
Mm-hmm. So is that a break or is that not a break?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can you say that again, Mike? Because what you just described in that were you showing the mesophysium there? Is not in the guide. Are you showing the side of the body there?
I am. I'll go back to. I'm trying to pull up Helianthe here. Hang on. Where's the USGS, the Discover Life site for it? There we go. So actually, so this is the type of Helianthe. And
so, yeah, that would be complete.
mm-hmm.
Okay,
So it's stretched.
It's not a little patch there. It's attached, is what you're saying.
Yeah. If
Right,
if I'm remembering right, you know.
Okay, and then this one, if we go back a section, that was Helianthe. This I was claiming was Cressonii.
Can you blow it up a bit?
Yeah, it only has sort of one blow up level. So, I mean, it looks pretty complete. There is this break here.
Yeah.
It has a break there. Again, I could have easily misidentified it. Let's take a look at.
Mike, can you say again, like how you would word that in a key? Because that character I'm not seeing in Molly's key unless it was the higher up and we didn't address it.
Hang on a second.
He talks about T1 and T2 and etc.
Yeah, she mentions T2 band complete in Helianthe and incomplete in Cressonii, but sometimes again, it's like the lateral thorax pubescence. Sometimes the incompleteness is so narrow that it, and Molly mentions that with respect to T2. Well, I think it's the same with the lateral thorax pubescence. The incomplete.
Here's T2. No, that's T1. I'm looking at my theoretical Cressonii. It's a little difficult to say.
Yes, well, and she acknowledges as much.
Yeah, here's T2 and also the wing is a little bit in the way here. If we look at that more closely, it's still difficult to tell whether it's broken here or not. Yeah, it's just the wing is preventing that, and that might be or might not be. And I don't know, is Cressonii or Helianthe supposed to have the
complete?
This one?
Helianthe would be complete.
Yeah, so here's the type specimen, and it's complete in this particular case. I don't think I have. I don't have any Helianthe photos. Interesting is that Helianthe is in the yellow haired group, but maybe this is just faded. That doesn't look yellow to me.
I wouldn't call it yellow either.
Yeah, but it's probably faded. So if we look at the Cressonii one, it clearly is yellowish here.
Again, male and female have same complete or not complete.
Yeah, as far as I know, yeah, they're one of those cases where that patterns are the same in the sexes.
All right, we leave people with their own mystery to resolve.
Mystery.
Looking at your specimens. All right, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Sam. I'm still working on the Maryland stuff. I had to be gone for a couple weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I look forward to that. I'm deep into sand bee. It's like this could be a paper, and looking at the history of sand. And for example, I've lined up, as you saw on that one table, all of these sand species in Maryland basically are southern in distribution.
Okay.
And they're really